Thank you for joining us. You are a part of an elite group who recognizes that Black women's health should be at the forefront of the national conversation. We are mothers, daughters, activists, entrepreneurs, entertainers, corporate warriors, and more, who help boost the economy and often drive the national conversation. For 38 years, the Black Women's Health Imperative has strived to amplify our voices, help enact policy that protects us, research our issues, create programs that enhance our lives, and produce events like this one to ensure we keep the conversation going about the issues that matter to us most. So, let's get started with our program.
Good evening. I'm Linda Goler-Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative. Thank you for joining us for the first installment of our Cultural Conversation series. Tonight, we're talking about sickle cell disease, which impacts the Black community in disproportionate numbers. Sickle cell disease, also known as SCD, affects millions of people throughout the world and impacts approximately 100,000 people in the United States alone. About 1 out of every 365 Black babies is born with SCD, and 1 in every 12 is born with a sickle cell trait, which has medical and hereditary implications. The Black Women's Health Imperative has partnered with Bluebird Bio, our sponsor for this evening. Our goal is to raise awareness about SCD and to educate the community on the promise of care innovations, including gene therapy for improved quality of life and survival of people living with sickle cell disease. September is Sickle Cell Awareness Month, and BWHI has been honoring the sickle cell disease community with a social media campaign entitled Sickle Cell Unity. The campaign showcases SCD patients, caregivers, physicians, thought leaders, and patient advocates who are partnering to raise awareness, provide treatment, and advocate for research and cures. We have featured some awesome people this month. So join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and hear and see the truly inspirational stories. Tonight, Playing with Sickle Cell features 4 outstanding NFL players who have been affected by sickle cell disease: Ryan Clark, Santonio Holmes, Devin McCourty, and Jason, and Ty Montgomery. In addition, we'll have Dr. Kim Smith-Whitley, a physician who has devoted her life's work to sickle cell disease research, and she's here to keep us honest. So, why NFL players? These elite athletes are living proof that sickle cell is not undefeated. For parents of children and adolescents who aspire to play sports while they battle the disease, we felt these stories deserved attention. And with that, I'd like to welcome our moderator for the evening, Jamel Hill, with a hearty "Go Blue," despite the fact that she attended Michigan State. Jamel ascended to rarefied air as an anchor on ESPN SportsCenter, and over the past decade, she's also been featured on ESPN's The First Take, First and 10 with Skip Bayless, and Jim Rome is Burning. Beyond being an award-winning sports journalist, talk show host, and podcaster, Jamel is fearless. I have tremendous amount of respect for her not sticking to sports. Jamel is an advocate for Black women's health, and it is my honor to have her with us tonight. And I can think of no one better to lead us through this most important discussion. And with that, Jamel, I just want to turn this over to my Big Ten sister, but I do have one burning question.
Okay.
So is it true that Ryan Clark really is good at spades?
You know what? I know Ryan put you up to that. I'm going to deal with him when he and I have a conversation in a moment or two. See, Ryan, I was trying to take the high road, and he had to bring
He
me
said he was the best.
You know what? Okay.
Jamel Hill.
First with the Go Blue, and now Ryan. He just happened to have a very fortunate victory in spades over me and my former co-host, and he has never let me live this down. So.
It was a fluke. Okay.
I'm gonna go with it was a fluke. Then he cheated. That's the other favorite one. Well, thank you, Linda, for that wonderful introduction. Aside from the Go Blue part, she cut me to the core, and so hopefully I have some Michigan State grads and who are out there and alums who can support me in this trying time. But we'll see in a few weeks when our universities actually play each other in college football. But nevertheless, this is a tremendous, needed, critical conversation for our community to have. And I think it's important that we have these conversations with athletes. As we've seen over the last few months, a lot of professional athletes, former athletes, just all those in the athletic community are really doing an excellent job of using their platform to talk about social justice issues and just in general to talk about a lot of important issues that specifically impact the African American community. Linda gave you the stats that showed how sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease, how they impact our community. And so I think it's really important that they not only bring an attention to social injustice and to critical issues concerning justice and police reform and criminal justice reform, but also health. Because as we know, African Americans, when it comes to virtually everything, we are disproportionately impacted, not just in hereditary diseases and not just in other ailments, but also in the type of care that we receive. And so I believe hearing from these athletes tonight can provide a lot of inspiration and guidance to those of you who might be battling some of the same things that they also have gone through. And I know that we all know them as essentially being superheroes because of their athletic pursuits and because they have, in many cases, brought championships like Santonio and Ryan, Super Bowl winners. But, they also are regular people, just like most of us, and they have to still deal with these issues despite the things that they've been able to achieve on the athletic field. Now, with that, I think we'll kick things off. Linda mentioned the McCourty twins, Devin and Jason, outstanding NFL players, but they also have had their own special and intimate experience with a sickle cell disease. They've had family members who have suffered from the trait, friends that they've known. They've had to experience firsthand just coping with this disease, even though they themselves are not a trait carrier or a disease carrier. However, that being said, they've embraced this issue to the point, speaking of embrace, that they have a foundation called the Embrace Kids Foundation, which supports families that are battling sickle cell. So here we have a video from the McCourty twins to talk about this very important issue. And on the other side of that, we'll get into our conversation.
What's up, everybody? Jason McCourty here, Devin McCourty here. Before we start, I want to thank the Black Women's Health Imperative for just putting on this webinar and allowing Devin and myself to share our short message with you. Sickle cell disease is something that's been in our family since we were born. Our father had the trait, and we have an aunt and uncle who both suffer from the disease. So growing up, watching my aunt firsthand, seeing the struggles that she's gone through, the pain that she's gone through, the surgeries, just the sickness over the years and how it deteriorated her life, just inspired Devin and myself to be able to get in the community and be able to give back and bring more wellness and more funds to the sickle cell disease.
Yeah, and I would just say my aunt was an inspiration. She passed away 2 years ago at the age of 69. But because of her, we started about 8 years ago doing 5K walks, blood drives, casino nights, comedy nights, hosting a bunch of different events to raise money and awareness for sickle cell. And coming up on October 26th, we will be having a virtual event with a lot of teammates and just to continue to bring awareness and funds to a bunch of different great organizations like Embrace Kids, Boston Medical, and Next Step Program.
Yeah, it's been a great journey, and I would tell anybody out there, whether you're a parent who has a kid who's suffering from sickle cell disease or you're a young adult getting ready to start your life, make sure you surround yourself with a community that understands your disease and knows how to help you through the process. We've talked to kids of all ages, and that tricky areas now when you get out of the pediatrics and you're going to be an adult and figuring out who's going to be your healthcare provider. Hey, as you do that, build out that community, build out other people who are suffering and going through the disease that you can lean on, and just other people that can help you. This webinar is a great source, and there's going to be other things like it. So make sure you tune into those things and you're always paying attention to your health.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Devin and Jason, for those inspirational words and for sharing how the disease has personally impacted you and what inspired you to make this into a wider and larger conversation, and more importantly, to help others who are experiencing the same thing. We, of course, have done this panel just so you can hear not just from professional athletes, but also from experts as well. And it's important that we get the athletes and their perspective on this, because they're dealing with a very unique set of challenges, being professional football players, having to deal with this disease and with having the established traits. So with that, I'd like to welcome in to begin our conversation, my former colleague, Ryan Clark, who's currently an analyst at ESPN. Don't let him fool you. He just an okay space player. He got me that one time. He did it. I mean, the cards fell his way. Y'all know how it goes, but no. Ryan is my homie, a former Pro Bowl safety, played with the Steelers for many, many years. Just a terrific person all the way around, except for when he on the space table, he's my sworn enemy.
And I'm better than you.
You know what? You're not going to derail this conversation. We got. I also want to welcome in Ty Montgomery, who's a running back currently with the New Orleans Saints. Ty, really sorry about the latest toughest loss to the Packers. This has not been, I know it's been a little bit of a rough season. I promise you, I'm not picking on you, but we're happy to have you here to talk about what it's like to be a current player playing with sickle cell. But Ryan, I want to start with you first. I want both of your perspectives, but I'll just start with you first. The pandemic right now, that means something different to you than it does to maybe the rest of us. So explain what this experience has been like for you as somebody who suffers from the sickle cell trait, and how you're managing existing in this pandemic.
Well, it's been easier for me to manage during this pandemic than I think most people, because when you have the trait, it's very seldom that crisis arise. For me, I had a sickle cell crisis because I played in Denver, the overexertion, and those things combined caused my blood to sickle. And that was also why it was just so difficult and so complicated for people to figure out, especially sports professionals, to figure out what was wrong with me. It was a very uncommon thing. But when you're dealing with it through this, I don't go through the things that many with sickle cell anemia do go through. My sister-in-law passed at the age of 27 from sickle cell. And I remember it was every week, every 2 weeks, she was in the hospital, so much so to where we were getting to a point to where it became normal. It became normalized. And when you'd walk in with her, they would think she was seeking drugs and seeking those type of things instead of actually seeking help, because she had built up such a tolerance from a pain perspective, because she was dealing with this, her entire life. And so for me, it hasn't been as bad. I just actually recently held Ryan's run for sickle cell anemia here with the South Louisiana Sickle Cell Association. And, we were having those conversations about continuing to try to help people not only find another FDA approved drug, but also build the awareness in the health community about what it is to have sickle cell, what it is to be treated for sickle cell onsets or sickle cell crisis. And especially in a time like this, where it's hard to be in hospitals, it's hard to see the medical professionals that you're used to seeing every day. And so for me, it hasn't been very difficult at all. But I know for a lot of people that I speak with, a lot of people that I deal with, a lot of people that I advocate for, it's been extremely tough during this time.
And what's your experience been like, Ty? You're currently playing, we're in a pandemic. How has this impacted how you go about your day-to-day?
Honestly, in the very beginning, it was really tough. Just because I didn't really know if having trait would give me complications if I were to test positive for COVID. And my son, who's 2 now, I didn't know if he had the trait. And so it was really nerve-wracking for me. And, he's my first and only child. So that was pretty nerve-wracking. I dealt with a lot of anxiety, and then going through the meetings before the season started, hearing the doctors say that we would treat Trey as if we would treat Trey as someone being high risk, like we would if they had sickle cell disease. That was alarming to me as well, especially because, from my understanding, not everybody with Trey experiences the same symptoms, doing the same things. There is the overexertion, but someone with Trey may not. I played a half of football in Denver, and I didn't experience any symptoms from having sickle cell trait. However, playing the Sunday-Thursday stretch was when I had my episode, and I was hospitalized for about 2 or 3 days. So it was. I was pretty nervous personally, just thinking about me and my son. But it's gotten a lot better, and just learned how to handle it and just go about my day like I normally would.
You say you were nervous. Did you ever consider not playing the season because you have the trait and being worried about maybe the potential to keep you safe?
I did for 2 reasons. My son, the political climate, and just I was nervous that if I were to test positive, could I potentially have symptoms that would have an effect on my career, long lasting? And it was a question I had to ask myself, and it was just something I decided to just trust God with and move forward. And I'm supposed to be playing football, and I love playing football, so I decided to continue to play. And if I'm not playing, then there's not a platform to be had to be used. So I decided to just press on.
Now, both you and Ryan are fathers. You both have kids. So, Ryan, I'll start with you. How did, knowing that this is a lifelong health issue for you, how did you manage this within your own family? Like, how concerned were you about passing on the trait, and
Yeah.
what was that experience like?
Yeah, I was extremely concerned, and from a young age, especially growing up with a father who had the trait, and talking about how to pick a spouse, and and going about marrying a woman, and understanding that if she had the trait, now your children were more susceptible to having sickle cell anemia, having sickle cell disease. And so that was something that my wife and I talked about. And when all of my children were being tested, I was very concerned. And only one, my daughter, I have 3. My daughter actually has the trait, and we do treat certain things that come along with her a little differently than the other 2. When it even comes to talking about picking schools, the way we've dealt with the pandemic, she had an opportunity to either go to school or she could do her classes online. We chose to have her do classes online so she wouldn't have to be around as many people, so she wouldn't have to come in contact with those that may have already been exposed to COVID. And so it's definitely a part of parenting. It's a part of your everyday. And I think the hardest part about it is for African Americans and for Black people, it affects 1 out of 10 of us, but it doesn't affect the world in the same way. And so when you are speaking about sickle cell trait, when you're seeking information and you're trying to talk to medical professional, not all of them are as well versed in it as you like to be able to help you make decisions as it comes to taking care of your family. And so for me, I haven't so much been worried about my health as I have hers and my children, when we were having them, just to make sure that they were okay.
Now, Ty, for you, and Ryan just talked about it, how did knowing that you have the trait impact your decision to have a family, or impacted your personal life, period?
It's something I think about, for sure. It's something that I try to not let hinder any of my decisions, or my actions, or my everyday life. We have not tested my son yet, his mother and I, but it's something that we're going to do in the future for sure, just so we can know. But with that being said, I just live my everyday life knowing that if he does have it, there is a plan, there are resources, and there are things like Black Women's Health Imperative to help educate people more, so we can continue to thrive and not just try to survive with this thing.
Now, Ryan, back in 2007, you had a very serious health episode related to you having sickle cell trait that cost you an entire season. Explain what happened, because I believe you were going into the game against, the Broncos, and
Yeah,
why playing in Denver is
yeah.
a difficult challenge for people who have sickle cell,
Mhm.
and just what happened that cost you this particular season, the episode that you had.
Yeah, so I had played in Denver one time previously, and I didn't understand at that time, but I got back home. I was in Washington, and I told them all week that something was hurting me under my left rib. I kept telling them, and then Friday came, and they finally sent me to a hospital, and they diagnosed it as a bruised spleen. And so I was like, whatever. So going back, I made the joke to my wife actually, like, oh, hope I hurt my spleen this time in Denver, just joking around. So we're getting on the plane after the game. I play the entire game, and I go to one of the trainers and I say, look, man, I was like, my spleen is hurting. And they kind of laughed about it. They were like, how do you know? I said, I've been through it before. I ended up staying in Denver overnight. They didn't really come to the conclusion of the sickle cell trait, of the overexertion. But when you're in the high altitude in that manner, you overexert yourself, it can cause your blood to sickle. Now, when you have the trait, that's not supposed to happen. And so if you're not a trained medical professional that understands that, or someone that deals with sickle cell daily, you don't really know. Getting the opportunity to go back to Pittsburgh, I stayed in Denver for a day. I met with some, hematologists, some different specialists, and they diagnosed it as a sickle cell crisis. I had a spleen infarction, but I kept, trying to come back and play and couldn't. I ended up, my spleen was infected. It was 4 times the size of a normal spleen. So I got my spleen taken out, my gallbladder removed, also a small piece of my liver. And, I went from 205 pounds to 160 pounds in a month because of the swelling, because of how small my stomach got. And it was one of those things that was never mentioned to me. It was never talked about. Prior to going to Denver, no one explained to me that this was a probability. It turns out it's less than 1% of the people with trait that will have this happen. I'm just one of the lucky ones, I guess, and that's so I'm just special like that. My mom always told me I was special anyway. And that's what happened. But what it taught me was that the education, the awareness, the preparedness of the people who deal with, as medical professionals who deal with people with the sickle cell trait or sickle cell anemia, they really aren't well versed in it. They haven't studied it to the point where they understand the ins and outs of how people can be affected. And so that was kind of what started my passion in educating, not only educating myself, but educating others and advocating for others about sickle cell. Because if that could happen to me and I can have no idea that it's possible, imagine what people who are going through living with sickle cell each and every day have to deal with when they go into the hospital.
Now, Ty, you didn't find out until you were at Stanford. So tell me how this happened, and did it ever make you doubt whether or not that you could play at the highest level?
This is why I'm really grateful for the Stanford training staff, because they tested every individual. I want to almost say they specifically targeted every African American, at least the years that I was there. They tested them to see if they had sickle cell trait, and then you were put on a list for here's how you have to go about your training program. So I was very fortunate and blessed to be educated by Stanford. I remember growing up, I cramped a lot faster than everybody else. I've been hospitalized 2 or 3 times for full body cramps. My body would just lock up. I didn't know why. It didn't matter how much Pedialyte and water I drank. There were times where I cramped before football games, and I'm peeing as I'm cramping, and that's not supposed to be happening. I get that lactic acid feeling or reaction in my muscles a lot faster than everybody else. I'm a very explosive guy. If I'm doing bench press, I can give you 10 really good reps, and then all of a sudden I can't do 11 for some reason. So when I got to Stanford, it all made sense. But Stanford did a really good job of teaching me. There was a split second where I didn't know how this was going to affect my football career, but Stanford taught me that I need to eat hydration, I need to drink hydration, I need to sleep hydration, and I just have to do more than the average other athlete, whoever, in order to be sure that my body has the oxygen that it needs. My body is in shape. And so from that moment on, I've just always trained myself in a way to overexert myself, but I know when to stop. So Stanford has done a really good job in just teaching me what to eat, what not to eat, and how to help myself.
The difference between Stanford and LSU, Jamel, right there.
Well, you can say that about your own school, so we'll allow it. Now, there's potentially some young athletes who are watching, or maybe just some athletes right now who are dealing with either the trait or the disease, who are looking at you two now. I'd like for you both to answer this, but Ryan, I'll start with you. What advice would you have to athletes who are trying to manage sickle cell along with their athletic careers?
I think one, Ty hit it on the head with hydration. That was something I learned after my incident in Denver, and just to understand that our bodies react in a certain way. Very much like Ty, I was a guy who could do really well in conditioning tests during the summer, working out, and then all of a sudden, when we got to the 2 days where they combined everything, I would lock up every single time. With so much so, Coach Saber was like, "Man, we know you worked. Get off the field." And so I would also say understanding your limits. You can go back to Cal and other schools where we've had incidents of people who have the sickle cell trait dying from conditioning. And that's because that our limits and where we start to feel things are in different places than other people. And so I would think it would be educate yourself on how to maintain yourself from a nutrition standpoint, from a training standpoint, but also be extremely honest with how you feel. I know, we grew up, when you play football, you grow up in this world of machismo where you can't say I'm tired, where you can't say I feel a certain thing, where they ask you to continuously push through each and everything they tell you to do. But you have to, and I always, and this is what I say, like I get a lot of calls about it. I get people reach out to me. I always say that we are different, but we're not defective. And I think that's extremely important to understand, that your body's react in a different way, but it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to do it. You just have to be smart about it. And so, like I said, you want to be educated, you want to be aware, you want to take care of yourself, but also you need to be honest with the way that you're feeling to yourself and to the people who are actually put in charge to make sure you're okay.
What advice do you have, Ty, for young athletes who may be dealing with this?
The only thing I would add to what Ryan said is discipline. You're just gonna have to make some decisions, and if it really matters to you, you're just gonna have to make those decisions to make some sacrifices on some maybe what some other kids are doing, people your age that are doing. If they're going out drinking, you might not be able to drink the way that they can drink. If they're telling you to drink a Pedialyte, you might need to drink 2. If they're telling you to replenish your body with 2 water bottles, you might have to do the work to replenish your body with 4 water bottles. But it's not just water. As Ryan said, you have to educate yourself. It's electrolytes. Sometimes the sodium can be really good for you. The pickle juice can be really good for you. It's old school, but it works.
Yeah.
Educate yourself on herbs and essential oils like turmeric, for example, collagen, anything that you can put in your body that can help your body, that's going to help your red blood cells, because that is what your body needs to heal and to recover and to perform, as well as eating hydration as well. You got to put carbs in your body. Pasta can be really good for you. If high schoolers are having these pasta parties, if your friends are having like chicken Alfredo, you might not be able to eat the Alfredo. Maybe you need some marinara because the Alfredo might dehydrate you. The Alfredo might be heavy on your body, and it might cause your body to react differently because of the trait that you're carrying. Again, sickle cell trait, it's not likely that you would have some of these symptoms, but you can definitely have these symptoms as you start to overexert yourself, and your limit is going to be reached sooner than somebody else. And you just have to know yourself. It doesn't mean you can't push your limits or push past your limits, but you have to listen to your body, and you have to feel your body in every way, the right way.
Real quick, Ty, I'd love to just get this answer from you. I mean, you guys are both in a sport that teaches you, and pretty much it's embedded in the culture of football, that you have to push past your limits. And they, knowing that athletes are dealing with certain conditions, that doesn't always go over well with coaches and people that that determine your playing time, and for that matter can impact your livelihood. So how have you found the support in the football community as you have coped with having sickle cell, Ty?
I don't know. Like
I mean, be honest, man. Be honest.
Yeah, that's one thing about me. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna speak what's on my mind. I'm never gonna hold back, and I'm gonna always tell the truth. And it's hard. I would say if anybody needs support or is looking for support, it's hard to get support when people don't know how to or that you even
Mm-hmm.
need support. And the only way they know that is you communicate.
Yep.
There is a fine line, especially in this profession, between complaining and just being open and honest. But there's nothing wrong with being honest about, hey, I got sickle cell trait. I know you want me to do this extra set. I know you want me to run this extra rep. I'm gonna do it, and I can do it, but I'm just letting you know. Or you have to be open and honest and say that you can't do it. Because I play with some guys who they push their limits, and they'll tell the coach like, "Hey, look, this is something that I can't do," and there's technology these days to back that up. And teams, from my experience, these days have shown to support that. They'll test you, they'll work with you, they'll do whatever's necessary. I, for one, have learned that I can't. I love sitting in the hot tub. I sit in it too much. I have learned that I can't sit in the hot tub as long as I'd like to, because that will cause my body to dehydrate. That'll cause me to reach my limits a little sooner. So, you can't really get support if you're not being open and honest with yourself and with those around you.
Okay. Well, thanks for being honest because I know it was, hey, I understand.
A little touchy.
Right? Who signs the check? Like, I get it.
Right.
But that's a tough balance, I think, for somebody in your position. And I know it was a tough balance for you in your position, Ryan. Okay, with that, I guess we're going to make this an all-out Steelers party. Joining us next on the panel, Antonio Holmes, former Pro Bowl wide receiver, Super Bowl MVP. He brought the towel. I had nothing to do with this. I just want you to know.
Man, y'all set me up.
I had nothing to do with it. They shameless, man. They shameless.
We are.
Well, Antonio, thanks for joining our conversation. You have a different perspective on this issue because your son was diagnosed or has been diagnosed with sickle cell. So talk about that diagnosis, how you found out about it, and what that experience was like.
Oh man! First and foremost, thank you, Jamel, for welcoming me to the show, and to Ryan and Ty. I sat back and I listened to you guys' story, and I know everything that you're going through, everything that you've experienced. I'm getting chills, right now, and I'm shaking because my emotions are running so high at how much of advocates that we have become at pushing, at getting funding for sickle cell. And this movement has given us a great platform and opportunity to show and broadcast that us athletes really care about, our community. So to that, I was unaware that I carry sickle cell trait. I lost family members, and hearing about sickle cell, didn't care to protect myself at any cost as a young kid. I could recall all the times that I had been hospitalized in elementary school because I was outside playing with my friends too long, or I didn't go inside and get any water throughout the day, and just sitting in the house panting all night long. My lower back is hurting, Mom. My stomach is hurting, and my arms, they just have these weird pains, running down my arm that I can't explain, what's going on. And at the age of 18, I had my first son, and being a senior in high school, still young Black man, uneducated about my health and how important it was for me to be aware that I even carried this trait. So when my son was born, they kept him in the incubator for 3 days, said that we couldn't take him home because they had to run all these tests on him. And when they finally came back with the results that he had sickle cell disease, and I just went into shock that I didn't think that it was my fault, or I didn't know how did this come about. But when push came to shove, Mom and I found out that we both were trait carriers. And the way that God had blessed me in this situation was, it was the first time that we had intercourse and the condom breaks. So for us being uneducated, we were two young teenagers that were unaware of even the situation that we had even encountered. So moving forward, I get to Ohio State, and still they run all these tests, and I played football. I remember my senior year, my junior year, excuse me, we played against Marshall University. It's the second game of the season, and I'm having the best game of my life. Uh, by third quarter, I catch a full, by halftime, I have almost close to 200 yards receiving in this game. And I catch a full body cramp to where I had to be taken out of the game before halftime and couldn't come back into the game until late in the fourth quarter. We ended up catching a pass on the sideline to help our team win the game. But I can recall just sitting in the training room and getting an IV, injected into my body, and not knowing why did I have to catch a full body cramp today on one of the best days of my career. I'm feeling great. Our team is winning, and then we end up winning by a field goal because I felt I wasn't contributing enough, throughout the second half. Get fast forward to National Football League. We have Ryan Clark playing in Denver. I was actually a teammate of his at that particular time. His incident happened, and for some reason, this was my first time ever playing in the city of Denver, and I can recall running back to the sideline literally after my warm up was asking for an inhaler because I can't breathe. Like something's wrong, something's short in my breath. This is not the time that I should be, short of breath because the altitude is very thin. We should be able to breathe good, got clean oxygen. I didn't understand the fact that I carried a sickle cell trait. So another incident, I get to the New York Jets, and here I am at 26, 27 years old. And one morning I'm getting ready to go to practice and I can't get out of my bed. I'm stumbling down the stairs and I'm standing up and I'm very weak and I don't know why. I don't know what's happening to me. And I called the head doctor for the New York Jets, and he sent me over to the medical center down in Morristown, New Jersey. And I got in, and my vitamin D count was like at a -4. My B12 was low. My iron I was very iron deficient, at that time, and I was just unaware that like, why is this happening to me? And after they came back and asked me, have I ever spoken to a hematologist about, having sickle cell or any conditions? And I just told them no, because no one ever told me that this was what I was dealing with, as a young kid. And now I see that I have a son who is 18 years old and a freshman in college, and thankful for myself wanting to be supportive of the fact that he was going to live with this condition that was going to be deteriorating to his life, that we don't have a cure for. So I went out and I played professional football so that I could provide for all the medical expenses that I know he was going to endure, because he wasn't built the same way that I was, because he carried the full disease, and that carried more complications with him, wanting to play sports. So throughout his childhood, he was the kid that was Santonio Holmes, the superstar son, but he was not an athlete. And it really hurt us a lot to endure that. But, we continue pushing forward and told him that God has a bigger plan for you and I in this world, and that's to bring attention to this cause. And I think that Super Bowl catch has allowed, me to have this opportunity to build a platform that has given us a voice that sickle cell people need help, and we need blood, and we need care, and we need as much support as any other disease that is rare and unkind and unknown, to every mankind.
I'm going to ask you about your foundation, Third and Long, in a moment. But Ty said something earlier about how his son has not been tested yet for a sickle cell. You found out, obviously, through your son that this is something that you have been battling with. You said something interesting, the fact that, there was a part of you that once you found out about your son, you kind of blamed yourself. How did you get over feeling as if you had, that you were to blame for what your son now faces?
I had a heart-to-heart with my father, and I asked him, was this something that was hereditary? Did we pass on? And that's when I found out that I had lost family members, prior to that, but no one had ever really spoken about it because it was like a foreign disease that you don't want to have as a little kid. You don't want to be called a kid with sickle cell. I can remember a young kid that went to school with us. His eyes would get super yellow from having
Mm-hmm.
jaundice. We would all just look at him like it was something wrong with him, and we didn't want to be around that. But not knowing that I even carried the sickle cell trait, and the reason that my eyes still to this day have a darker tint to my cornea is because I carry the sickle cell trait. So just having just not being aware of the complications that it caused for an individual, but here we are making fun of people who are living with this condition that no one really wants to be a part of, but we're uneducated at even how it even affects us to this day.
Before we bring in our expert, we have a doctor who will be joining us. Just tell us about Third and Long, and you know the inspiration behind it is obviously your personal experience, but tell us about some of the things that your foundation is doing in terms of combating this disease.
So if you look at the Third and Long Foundation.org, and you'll see that we started in the fall of 2001, and our mission in the Third and Long Foundation was to just raise awareness to help fight for sickle cell disease and provide financial support and treatment options for our families who are affected by the disease. So since my son had been hospitalized a number of times with transfusions and crises and collapsed lungs at times, we had fought a lot about getting his schoolwork to him and making sure he do his work. So we started providing tutoring for him in the hospital. And I had mentioned to our VP, Evan, who works in the foundation, that we should do this for all the hospitals that we are associated with, because there are multiple kids who are dealing with this, and their parents, can't really provide that kind of service for helping a kid with some kind of math problem or English work, that they're unaware of how to solve those problems. So we provide tutoring and help access to raise care for our caregivers who come out and support all of our people who are in need in our community.
Well, that's definitely a wonderful way for you to use your platform and combine that with your purpose. Now I'd like to bring in, we have a doctor that will be joining us here on the panel to explain just where we are with sickle cell and what medical advancements have been made, and just kind of go through the expert, the health side of this. Dr. Kim Smith-Whitley joins us now. She has a very impressive title, Director of Hematology and Director of the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Center at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. Dr. Smith-Whitley, thank you for joining us. We've heard some deeply personal experiences from these athletes about what they've gone through, what their families have gone through. Tell us, where are we with sickle cell in terms of finding a cure? What's the status right now?
So first of all, thank you, all of you, for raising awareness about sickle cell disease. You all have done such an outstanding job at explaining how sickle cell is an inherited condition. It's something that you're born with. It's not anything that's contagious. And I'm so glad that you talked about the stigma associated with the yellowing of the eyes in particularly communities of color. So thank you for clarifying some of these issues and dispelling so many myths. One of the things that's really important is that in the US now, we have newborn screening that you can have, so that before your baby leaves the hospital, if you so opt, you can find out whether or not your child is living with sickle cell disease. And that's how we find sickle cell trait in many young babies. The problem is that because sickle cell primarily affects African Americans, it's also in the context of the socioeconomic injustice and racism that has impacted us as a community. And so sickle cell is a health disparity. And so even though many are tested for sickle cell trait, and essentially when they're born, many families don't know the information, and it's not done as effectively as we would like to. So I think that one of the things to remember is that, yes, 1 in 12 African Americans is living with sickle cell trait. And that means that we have 3 million here in the US impacted by sickle cell trait, but there are 300 million worldwide. living with sickle cell trait. So this is a advantage in many communities where malaria is prevalent, because it means that you have an advantage in not getting severe complications from malaria. But we also know that there are other things associated with sickle cell trait. We've heard of some of those things: problems with the spleen in rare circumstances, problems with exertion and collapse in rare circumstances. But it's very important in communities of color, particularly, to know your sickle cell status and know whether or not you're living with sickle cell trait or living with disease. So thank you for bringing this awareness. Also, it's very exciting that we have many new therapies, as Mr. Holmes alluded to earlier, I think, and also Ryan Clark in talking about some of the new therapies that are available for those living with sickle cell disease. And there is a cure for sickle cell. The cure for sickle cell is a bone marrow transplant. But you have to have a brother or a sister that's a match that doesn't have sickle cell disease. So imagine that is relatively few. So even though there's a cure, it's not a universal cure. And what we're looking for is ways of making transplant safer, expanding the donors that can donate to individuals with sickle cell disease. So as people of color, imagine being a match for someone living with sickle cell disease where you could actually provide a cure. So we know that that is a challenge. One of the other wonderful opportunities is that we're in experimental trials now with gene therapy, where individuals living with sickle cell disease, we can take their stem cells that grow up to be red blood cells in the bone marrow, collect those, send them off to a lab where the genetic code in that stem cell may be changed to be a healthier cell, where the sickle hemoglobin cannot act badly, and then you give those cells back to the individual living with sickle cell. And I think that that is one of the promises of the future. But until we have those cures, we've got to keep individuals living with sickle cell disease healthy. And that means getting access to care, reducing the stigma associated with sickle cell disease and pain so that they're not seen as being drug seeking, and really making sure that the health disparities are addressed by bringing more national attention and research funding to individuals living with sickle cell.
Before I ask you this next question, I want to bring back in Linda to our conversation. Linda Blount, yeah, there she is popping up. Hey, Linda. Doctor, I want to ask you, right now, you mentioned the health disparities. One of the biggest health disparities we know going on right now is with COVID-19 and how African Americans have been disproportionately impacted with that virus. Being that we're in this pandemic, can you discuss some of the challenges within this pandemic that those who are coping with sickle cell are facing right now, what that situation looks like for them?
So I think we've heard already some of the things that we're addressing, not only with sickle cell disease, but sickle cell trait. And I think that this is a very important issue to understand why. So we learned through the influenza, the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, that individuals living with sickle cell disease, once they had that influenza, were more likely to develop a potential life-threatening complication called acute chest, which is a pneumonia-like illness. So we assumed that with the COVID-19 pandemic, that individuals with sickle cell disease could potentially have more severe outcomes. So we needed to make sure that their exposure to COVID was limited. So you've heard how individuals with sickle cell trait are worried about being impacted, because I think many of us know that there are blood clots associated with COVID-19 infection, and we think that individuals with sickle cell trait may be predisposed to blood clots. So we have to consider how we can limit exposure. And so with individuals with sickle cell disease, they have to know when to come into the hospital when they're sick. And then they have to be challenged with staying healthy during COVID. And one of the ways that they stay healthy sometimes is for blood transfusions. They need blood transfusions to prevent stroke or recurrent strokes. And as you all know, one of the challenges in COVID-19 is making sure that we have blood donors. And African Americans are unique heroes to individuals with sickle cell because the proteins that sit on red cells of African Americans are very similar to those living with sickle cell who are African American. And when you're exposed to red cells repeatedly, your body can recognize that as being unlike your own. So African Americans are unique donors for individuals with sickle cell disease. And so we needed to make sure that African Americans were coming in and donating blood so that we could keep our population healthier. So there have been many challenges in the COVID-19 pandemic in making sure that individuals with sickle cell disease have access to good care.
Before we get to some audience questions, Linda, the doctor there was talking about challenges that are uniquely positioned in the African American community. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges that we face as a community is implicit bias and racism. So can you talk about how that impacts those who have sickle cell?
Yeah, and thank you. And I just want to add my thanks as well to you gentlemen for offering your stories, being so honest, but being an inspiration for adults, but particularly kids who are thinking about what lies ahead of them. I mean, you just let them know they can do whatever they want to do. So thank you for that. When we think, because this sickle cell is predominant among people from a certain part of the world, from the Middle East, from Africa, and obviously we see it in African Americans, it becomes a justice issue. Mm-hmm. So I think about research and not to sort of compare diseases, but cystic fibrosis, a genetic disease, 30,000 or so people living with cystic fibrosis has 7 times the funding rate for research out of the NIH as sickle cell. You're talking $800 per patient versus $175. And when you look at foundation funds, it's almost $4,000 per patient versus $13.70 for a sickle cell patient. So, already we've got a disparity in terms of what's funded and who's doing the research. Because of the 1,600 papers that were published, only 4% were published by Black researchers, and you don't have to be Black, but these are people who bring a certain set of experiences and sensibility to the study of the disease, to the patients, to clinical trials, and there's just no comparison. And then, as Ryan mentioned, Black patients in crisis show up at the emergency department even before COVID, and were likely to be treated as though they were drug seeking by providers in the emergency department when they're not. They could tell these providers chapter and verse what is happening with them, and they weren't believed. This still happens, and now, my fear is patients actually don't go to the emergency department because they're afraid of COVID, and so complications could be even worse. So, it's been touched on culturally. We have not talked about this as Black people, even though we knew there were people in our families who may have had sickle cell disease or the trait, we didn't talk about it. But, I just want to highlight what Dr. Smith-Whitley said. Newborns are supposed to be screened. Well, newborns still are not screened. It depends on what hospital you're born in. It depends on what zip code your hospital is in. You may not be screened. So you could get to be 18 and not know that you've got this trait. So we really are working on educating our members of Congress. We work closely on policy, on making sure there's appropriate funding for legislation, but also on providers. We're offering provider bias training because they've got to understand that Black patients who show up complaining of pain are not to be dismissed. They are to be treated. They are to be valued. They are to be respected. And they are to be cared for so that they can live the kind of lives that we all want to live. So again, I just want to thank you all for for your stories and for your courage and for the work that you're doing.
We have a number of questions for those from those who are watching right now. So I'm going to try to power through as many of those as possible. First question, this is for you, Santonio, that comes from someone who's watching. What advice would you share with parents who might have a child who is inflicted with sickle cell?
The piece of advice that I would like to share to all the parents who have kids living with sickle cell that want to become active and playing in sports, to listen to your kid's body. Pay attention to the way he carries himself on a day-to-day basis. Check out how much activity you allow him or her to exert during a specific setting. Take breaks. Allow your kid to understand why it's important for him or her to recuperate after a long session of swimming or running or riding a bike or playing basketball or football. That it is important to take in as many fruits and vegetables. Your nutrition and your diet is very key to raising a kid with sickle cell because they have less room for error and more room for improvement by accepting all the proper nutrients that are ingested into their bodies.
Okay. Ty, this question is for you from an audience member. What has delayed the process of knowing the status of your son? And was your son actually tested as a newborn? Linda mentioned the newborn screens. Was your son tested as a newborn?
Honestly, don't remember my son being tested. To be completely honest, being a first-time father, it was a C-section. I was just kind of in awe and everything, just really happy for my son to be there. But I don't remember him being tested. I know his mother and I have talked about all the different things we would like to get him tested for, so we can be aware and know what's going on. I think we just wanted to wait a little bit, just sort of let him grow into who he is, grow into his own a little bit. Just kind of let him be a little boy for now. As far as we know, he's very healthy, and as he gets older, then we'll start to know and test him for the things that we need to know. We just didn't want to sort of out of fear keep him out of something that may not have necessarily been bad for him. Just first time parents, just trying to learn how this thing goes. But I'm definitely 100% an advocate, and I'm very big and strong on making sure we know if he has sickle cell trait, because there may be complications that he experiences. He's already shown to be a little athlete at 2 years old, and we need to know if he's experiencing something. We need to know if it's because he's not working hard enough or if it's because he has sickle cell trait. So we need to go an extra mile in other ways to make sure his body has what it needs.
I'll address this audience question, you, Linda, since you just mentioned that this is something that we as a community don't really talk about that often. To that end, why does there seem to be historically a challenge to get Black Hollywood celebrities here? You have a panel full of athletes who are willing to share their experience. Why is it difficult to get maybe those outside of the athletic world, just in the entertainment world, to rally around this cause and this issue that we know is prevalent in our community?
Yeah, so part of it is, we just don't want to talk about these things that impact us with anything that seems to suggest it has something to do with race, which, some are afraid makes us look weaker or less than, which we're not. Everybody listening needs to know there is absolutely no biologic or genetic determinant for race. This is heritable. This has to do with country of origin and part of the world that people came from. And as Dr. Smith-Whitley said, how our bodies actually adapted. So part of this, and we see this with a number of other diseases where people just sort of shy away from it because they don't want to have to admit what they don't know or what they may be afraid of or what they have seen. In the Black community, we have been historically very poorly treated by physicians. We've been dismissed, we've been disregarded, we have been experimented on. These things that have happened not all that long ago are still very much front and center, even for people who didn't live through the Tuskegee experiment. People are aware of it. And so there is still very much a sensitivity about what it means to speak out about a particular disease or condition, but it's something we have to do. We've got to get this out in the open. We need more voices like these to say, here's what's happened. Look at what we're doing. We're surviving. We're thriving. We've got to get more resources, more research, and more attention. And we can't hide these issues. We can't pretend like cancer doesn't exist or sickle cell doesn't exist. We've got to meet it head on, be vocal about it, and go after what we need so that we don't suffer as a community from diseases that we should not be suffering from.
This next question is for all the athletes on the panel. An audience member would like to know where they can get information about specific training programs for athletes that carry the sickle cell code.
Do y'all know of any?
Yeah, I can take one for the team. I can take one for the team.
I'm about to say, Doc gonna have to take this one because I have
That's
never
actually,
heard of one.
we might need to get together and come up with that, because
I wrote that down on my notepad. That's why you see my arms are moving. I wrote that we need to develop training programs for sickle cell kids.
Yes.
There is actually so I'm going to hopefully challenge you all to write something, because it is very, very much so needed. We know that individuals with sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease need to exercise. Physical exercise is so important. You can exercise safely and condition safely. I've heard so many things about the rights of athletes recently, and one of the things that I will point out is the NC2A has guidelines that coaches are supposed to follow in training individuals with sickle cell traits. Also, the National Association of Athletic Trainers has guidelines on training with sickle cell traits. But I think that what I would like to do is to see someone who has experienced some of these issues take this on to really provide better information about hydration, about rest, about knowing your body, about knowing when to stop, and then furthermore challenging coaches to abide by what your recommendations are.
Well, I got another one for you, Dr. Smith-Whitley. An audience member would like to know, does blood bone marrow transplant have to be between a full relative, or can it be between half siblings?
So this is a really good question, and it goes back to how much of that match do you need in order to be safe? Because when bone marrow cells or stem cells don't match one another, it can make the recipient sick with something called graft versus host disease, which is a reaction that can almost become a chronic illness in and of itself. So we have to make sure that that match is as close as possible. And we have ways of dealing with treatments to make it safer when there's a mismatch. So in certain circumstances, parents can be marrow donors or stem cell transplant donors, but that's experimental. Right now, what's non-experimental is having a brother or a sister that's a full match that does not have sickle cell disease.
Okay.
Can I add on to that? There's an organization that I'm partnering with right now called Be the Match, and they have a registry that you can get on, and it's for potential matches for patients with sickle cell disease. If you want to do that, you can go to bethematch.org/pass it on, and it adds you to a registry, and it actually connects patients with a donor match as well.
Ryan, this next question is for you. Once your teammates knew you had sickle cell, how did they respond? Did you receive support from your team, staff, and the community?
Yeah, definitely. As far as your teammates, they always, your teammates are there. It's a brotherhood. I remember the day after I got my surgery, basically the entire defense was stuffed into my little room, checking on me. And so I immediately started to build my own team of doctors that I wanted information from and I wanted help from, because I didn't have all the information, but I wanted to be able to tell the staff and the trainers, this is what I'm experiencing. These are the things I've researched. Here's what I know. Here's how I need to be treated in certain situations. And so once they realized I had the trait, and also the severity of some of the things that I went through, I had full support from everyone. I think though very much so, like Ty, this was something I was aware of in college. They tested, I knew before, but they tested me when I was there. Also with the New York Giants, I was tested, and I was told like this in both places: you had the sickle cell trait, and people moved on. There wasn't a discussion beyond that for me. It wasn't that you could be affected in this way, or these things could happen, or this is the way you need to move forward in protecting yourself. They just let me know that I had it. To talk about something that Doc was speaking of, I went to LSU probably like 3 years ago, and I was standing on the field, and I was talking to the head trainer, Jack Marucci, about kids on the team or young men on the team who had the sickle cell trait, and the way that they would track them, the way that they would speak to them, the way that they would treat them. And it has come a very long way, at least collegiately, from what it was when I was in school. I can say though, overall, I didn't see the league change much due to some of the things that I experienced or other athletes in the NFL have.
For the players that are on the panel, what, if any, conversations were you maybe having with other players across the league who also were dealing with sickle cell? I mean, once people found out that this was something that was something you were personally experiencing, did that open up any conversations across the league for you?
For me personally, once I started sharing it with multiple teammates and just in conversation, it became more aware to me that multiple people had family members or distant relatives or cousins or friends that they knew that had this condition. And they were able to relate to some of the stories that we could share with them about the pains or crises or moments that we've had these experiences. So I think it has become more aware, but just like Ryan has said, that the NFL had not done anything, because being on the platform as a Super Bowl MVP and taking care of one of your most prominent figures in their health and becoming a marketable figure for your community, which is the National Football League, and all the support that it does for all these other initiatives to support breast cancer and all these things, but to not give awareness to the percentage of the individuals that make up the entire National Football League, an opportunity to have a voice to speak on a platform that has given us so much pain in our community. And here we are to support that, and you're not backing us. So, to that, I wish the NFL take heed to what has happened to us and how it affects us in our community, and begin to step up and support us.
Dr. Smith Whitley, I want to ask you, we're in a, despite some of our leadership trying to ignore that this problem actually exists, but obviously the climate crisis and environmental factors are a huge issue in this country right now. Can you explain how some of these issues have a direct impact on those who suffer from sickle cell?
First of all, I want to say that many people living with sickle cell disease want to stay as healthy as possible. So they do that by drinking lots of fluids, lots of water, eating healthy, getting plenty of sleep and exercise, and really trying to make sure that they minimize stress in their lives. And so one of the things that I think is a big issue with extreme temperatures is the change in barometric pressure. We know in individuals living with sickle cell disease can sometimes trigger pain episodes. And so they need to make sure to hydrate even more so at those times. When they go into hot and cold environments back and forth, if you're in a very hot day and it's 92 degrees and you go in a room and it's air conditioned and it's 72 degrees, that can bring on pain episodes. So really trying to pay attention. Yeah. Trying to pay attention to those things is so important, those extreme temperatures. And I think the other thing that we have to be aware of is air pollution. And I know that about 25% of individuals, the 100,000 individuals living with sickle cell disease here in the US, also has asthma. And we know that when your asthma is not controlled well, that some of the complications of sickle cell come on. So we really need to pay attention to our environments to try to make sure that we are aware of the conditions that we're going out in from a temperature standpoint and from an air quality standpoint.
I'd like to throw out this next question to you, Ty. Since you're currently active in the league, how do we get more players involved with raising awareness about sickle cell and maybe some of the other health disparity issues that are kind of related to it? What do you think might connect with them?
I think it's probably up to us to just be open to having the conversation more, and not just having the conversation, but taking it more seriously. For example, I've had teammates find out that I have sickle cell trait, but because of some of the things I learned, thanks to my college training staff and strength coaches, I don't experience as many complications as I used to. I had one episode when I was in the league where my muscles literally just broke down, and I got something called rhabdomyolysis. And I learned it was because of the sickle cell. My body skipped the phase of cramping and went to just breaking down the muscles altogether. So when I have teammates tell me about this and they're like, man, how can I stop cramping? You know, why is my back locking up? I think when we have those conversations, we just take them more seriously, and it might just be up to the players to just get together and God works in crazy ways. So maybe me being on this call is a wake-up call for me to be more active than I guess I already have been. We just need to take this more seriously. And I feel bad that we couldn't really give that one question and answer on a training program for someone with trait. I will say this though, since we don't necessarily have a training program, is it may not necessarily be a training program. Like there's nothing that I can't do that someone else can't do because I have trait. However, pre and post workouts is where it comes in. So research on nutrition and diet. A good place to start is heavy Levitical diet. You can just Google search Levitical. You can go in the Bible. But just clean eating, essentially. No bottom feeders, no fried foods. If you eat a steak, make sure it's not processed. It doesn't come with all that stuff. Have your fruits, have your vegetables, smoothies. Make sure you carb load and learn when to carb load. And as my old strength coach used to say, also sleep hydration. You just got to go the extra mile pre and post workout to get the blood flowing, because that's where the lack of oxygen is, as I've been told.
Wow, you said no fried food, and you're right there in New Orleans, huh? So
man, it was hard. I struggle at times.
Yeah. Like I get it, the mind is willing, but sometimes the flesh is weak. I know Ryan know about it. Ryan, this next question is for you. An audience member would like to know: does traveling to Denver still bother you?
You know, I haven't played there since that time. I have been back. I've been to a couple of conferences there, and I visited for certain reasons. And I don't know if I'm dealing with what everyone else deals with in Denver. Is it, you know, I do get winded very quickly. I do feel a little weak. I am often extremely tired, but I'm not necessarily sure that people who don't have the trait don't deal with that. And so I am different when I'm there than when I'm anywhere else. I just don't know if it's all because of the trait. I know, stupidly, you know, I put a team of doctors together and I wanted to go play against Tim Tebow in the playoffs because I was like, shoot, we need to win, you know. And Coach Tomlin was a good enough man to say that he wouldn't let his son play in Denver, so he wouldn't allow me. But I just remember being on the sideline and just being extremely dry the whole time and constantly drinking. And I actually got an IV before the game just for precautionary reasons. I wasn't even playing. I just wanted to make sure I was okay. And so there is some adverse effect to being there, but without actually playing, you know, I'm not necessarily sure, you know, if I would still be affected the way that I was before I lost the organs.
Before we wrap up the Q&A portion, I'll give this final question to you, Linda. What is the Black Women's Health Initiative doing to engage patients, researchers, advocates, about new developments in sickle cell, and how are you getting that word to lawmakers?
Yeah. Well, we're doing forums like this, and this has been enormously beneficial, and thank you all. But we're making sure that Black women in particular, because we are the caregivers and we are the chief medical officers of the family, as you all know, have the kind of information they need, that our lawmakers understand the sorry state of research and researchers. We talk about evidence-based decisions all the time, evidence-based medicine, but of course, what becomes evidence depends on who's being funded, what questions they're being asked, and who they're collecting the data from. So we need to make sure that more Black people are in these studies and conducting the research. And we are working with providers so that they treat people, that their patients, the way they need to be treated. We say to women all the time, you know, and I'll say it again, you don't take bad service from the cable repair guy, don't take it from your doctor. So we're also building those kinds of skills to make the best decisions for how to take care of their health and the health of their families.
Well, that's a good word to end this panel on. Thank you all for sharing your very personal experiences with us on this very important issue. I'm sure a lot of people gained some inspiration, but also I think, as you all can attest from conversations you probably have with each other and just with people in this community, that it always helps that when people find out that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones that are going through something in particular. And so I'm sure that Ryan and Ty and Santonio, you guys sharing your personal experiences, especially those concerning your families, are going to do a lot of people good and bless them enormously. Ryan, I ain't forgot. One day we're going to see each other on the space table again. It'll happen. It's all right. One day. I'm not going to hold this L forever, all right?
I'm about to say, until then, hold that L, though.
I'm holding it right now, but I'm not going to hold it forever.
And always remember, I beat you with a tall, bald-head white guy.
No, you could have left that detail out. You really you didn't have to share that with the group. I thank you.
SVP.
Wow.
You know what? It's on a slant. I had to explain later. But no, seriously, guys, thank you all for sharing.
Thank you.
Doctor, thank you for all the very helpful information. And with that, Linda, if you have a final thought to share, you can close us out.
I don't have much to share. I just want to add my thanks. Ryan, I'd love to come watch this Bid Whist match. We could probably raise some money, so please just let me know when you all schedule that.
That's right. A sickle cell space and
Absolutely. Ty and Santonio, thank you so much. Dr. Smith, Whitley, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Let us know what you thought about the show. Keep sending questions in. We'll make sure that we get them answered. And I just want to encourage you all to reflect on what you heard. And I'll just say again, sickle cell is not undefeated. We've got living proof right here. So Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.